Welcome to part number 3. If you are a little bit confused where we are, so let me show you. Just click on documentation and we are right over here, part number 3 for the views and the templates. So till now what I have done is I have already explained to you what is a view. Just to give you a small recap. So view is just a function. So let me open up my code editor. And inside polls, let me go to my views. Let me give you again a small recap. A view would be just your regular function, and this function should accept your request and it should give back a response. And it's not necessary to just give back an HTTP response. Suppose we are creating our API, in that case we can also give back a JSON response. Now to give you a small recap about the URLs. So if we go to my site, so my site is our project folder. Inside our project folder, we have a module for urls.py. So this is going to be our main URLs, and we have defined a URL like this, polls. And whenever we have a match on this URL, at that time we have told Django to include all of the URLs inside our polls application. So whenever a user navigates to this URL, Django is going to jump from here to inside our polls to our URLs, and here it is going to find a match. This is also called as the root path. Let me collapse my sidebar and let me put up a command. So we have, this has to be polls. So whenever we have a URL like this URL is going to match to our root path. And whenever we have a match, at that time Django is going to call a function, and the name of the function is index and the name of the module is views. So again, let me open up my sidebar. So whenever we have a match, Django will go inside our polls to our views, and it is going to call this function of index, and index is going to process the request and it is going to give back some kind of a response. Now let us go back to our URLs. We have also defined one more URL like this. So let me put up a comment. Suppose a user navigates to this kind of a URL. At that time we have a match right over here, and whenever we have this kind of a URL, we are going to invoke the details function inside our views module. So this is our details function. So this is what we have seen up till now. Now let us go to the Django documentation and let us get started with part number 3. So the first thing is they are trying to give you a small overview about different URLs, and here you can see that they are saying that if we have this kind of a URL, so this is not at all user friendly, and they would suggest you to create a URL something which is like this. So this is much more user friendly. Let us go a little bit down. So here they are saying that how we can define a couple of more views, and they also have the matching URLs right over here. So what we can do is, let us do all of these things one function or just one URL at a time. So let us go first with the details view. First let me copy this and let me go back to my code editor. Now remember that we had created this detail view a couple of lectures back, but we don't need it right now. So let me take it out, and I don't need the JSON response as well. And let me paste the new code which I've just copied. Let me add my type hint. So the request is of the type of HTTP request. The question ID, this has to be the type of integer, and I'll explain it shortly why it has to be an integer. And again, this has to give back an HTTP response. Also, let's change this to a formatted string. So here I can put the curly brackets and I can say my question ID, and I don't need this. Let me take it out. Let me save the file, and let us go back to the documentation. So what we did is we simply created one view, and let us see what they are saying for the URL. So this is the matching URL. Let me copy this. Now remember, we have already a URL for index. That's why I'm copying from here. So we are interested in details right now. So let me go back to my URLs. Again, remember, you have to go inside your polls, and inside polls, this is my URLs file. And let me paste it right over here. Now this was the old thing that we had written, so I don't need that. So let me delete these two lines. So now what they are saying is, if a user goes to this kind of an URL, that is polls/5, at that time we want to invoke the view of detail. But before that, let us have a look at this URL pattern. You can see that this time we have our open and closed brackets. So what this bracket means that we want to create a dynamic URL. So for example, this could be your question ID number 5, it could be 6, it could be 7, it could be 8, it can be anything. That means the data is going to be dynamic. And this open and close brackets indicate that we want to create a dynamic URL. Now the next thing is, this is the type of data that we want. Now the question is, how does Django know that this 6 is not a string, or it has to be treated like an integer? So we need a way to say to Django that this 6 has to be an integer and not a string. And we do it by writing integer right over here. And after the data type, you can see that we have a colon, and after the colon, we simply create a new variable, and we can name the variable anything that we want. But in our case, this 6, this number denotes the question ID. That's why we have created a variable and we have named the variable as question ID. So whenever we have a match for this URL, at that time we want to invoke the details function inside our views file. For a moment, let me split my screen so it's much easier for us to understand. And here let me open the URLs on the left. Let me open the views on the left, and we have the URLs on the right. Now for a moment, let me zoom out so it's a little bit easier for me to understand. Okay, so here it is. On line number 8, we have the details view, and on the right we have the path for the detail view. So whenever a user goes to this kind of a URL, polls/6, what Django is going to do is it is going to call this details function. Now if we go to the left, so this is our views file, and we can see that we have created this detail function. The first parameter, as you know, it has to be a request, and the next parameter you can see right over here. So this is the question ID. Please keep this thing in mind. The name of this parameter should match to our URL. So on the left, we can see that we have question ID, and on the right, inside our URLs file, we have the same name. And inside the URL, we have defined the type as an integer. That's why inside our views, I have also defined the type as an integer. So this pattern should match the pattern that we have defined inside our URLs. So what Django is going to do is, it is simply going to take the 6, convert it to an integer, and that integer is being passed to our view on the left and inside this variable. Let me close this file so it's much easier for us to understand. Now what we can do is, let us test if this view is working or not. So if I open up my URLs, so let us try with the same pattern, polls/6. So this is our application, and if I just go polls/6, and here we have some kind of a response. So the response says that you are looking at question number 6. So if we go back to our code, and if we go to our views.py, we can see that we are creating the exact same response. So this response is saying that you are looking at question and the question ID that is being passed to our view. So in our case, as you can see that the URL defines the question ID as 6. That's why we have 6 right over here. So instead, if I say maybe 7, then we have 7. If I say it has to be like 100, then we have 100 right over here. So let us go back to our code. So again, let me try to repeat in short. We have created a URL and this is the pattern, and the pattern is defined like this. And just because we want to create a URL which is dynamic, that's why we have the brackets. And whenever we hit this URL, the views function of detail is being run and we are seeing the output right over here. Now let us go back to the documentation and let us see what's happening next. Let me scroll a little bit up. So let me copy the next function or the next view. Let me go back to my code editor. Let me paste it right over here. And again, we can have a formatted string and we can say that this has to be my question ID. Again, let us write the type hinting. This has to be my request. This has to be my integer, and we always return some kind of a response. Now we have the view, and the next thing that we want is the matching URL pattern. So again, let us go back to the documentation and right over here, let me copy the matching code from here and let me go to my URLs, and after the details, let me paste it right over here. So here they are saying that if we have this kind of a pattern, polls followed by the question ID followed by results, at this time we want to invoke the results view. And again, this is the pattern that we define. Now remember, this has to be dynamic and this is static. And if we go to our views file, we can see what we are trying to do. Again, we are not doing anything with the view right now. We are simply printing out a simple string to our screen. So if I go back and let us go back to our application. So suppose we go to polls/6/results. Oops, we have some kind of an issue. And here we can read that the issue lies over here. So it's inside our polls, inside our views file at line number 14. So let us go back to our code editor. So this is our line number 14. Oh yes, I forgot to update this line over here. So it has to be just be response. Let us go back, let me refresh, and yes, we have the result. So the first thing that you can see is the URL. So this is the question ID followed by results, and we have the matching text saying that you are looking at the results of question number 6. So let us go back to the documentation and let us see what we are supposed to do next. So the next and the last view that we want is for the vote. Let me copy this function and let me go to my views file and let me paste it right over here. Again, let me add the type hints. This has to be our request. This has to be my integer, and this has to give back a response. Again, I want a formatted string, and let me change this to my question ID. And before I forget, let me take this thing out. Now again, we have the view. The next thing that we want is the matching URL pattern. So again, let us go back and let me copy the URL pattern from here, and let me go to my URLs file. At the last, let me paste it right over here. So here we can see the pattern. The pattern is like this. So we have the question ID right over here, and after the question ID we have vote, and again this is how we define the dynamic URL. And whenever we have a match for this URL, Django is going to call the function of vote. Now if we go to this function of vote, we can see again this accepts a request and the question ID, and this is simply going to display that you are voting on question followed by the question ID. So let us go back and let us try this one out. So this has to be vote, and we have the output saying that we are voting on question number 6. Again, if you want to change, you can change the question number. Suppose we can say 3, then we get the output as we are voting on question number 3. Now let us go back to the documentation. So on this line, they are saying the exact same thing. So for example, if we go to the function of detail, the type of the request that Django is processing is our HTTP request, and the question ID is of the type of integer that we can see right over here. And now here they want to create a view that can actually do something more meaningful. So let me first copy all of these things, and then we can see what's happening inside. So remember, this is for the index function. So let us go back, and the first thing that I need to do is I need to import my model of questions. So here I can say that from the current package, go to the module of models, and from models I want to import question, and let me go right over here. Let me take this out and let me paste the new code. Now what's happening right over here on line number 7 is, if you remember a couple of lectures back, we saw how to use the database API. So what they're doing right over here is they want to query the database for all of the questions, but they want to order our questions by publication date. And this hyphen means that we want the order to be in descending order. So if I take out the hyphen, this means that the order should be in ascending order. And right over here we have created a slice. That means we simply want to see the first 5 results only. So again, let me put a hyphen saying that we want to have a descending order. Just for your convenience, let me write a select statement, so I can say that suppose this is the select statement, select star from our table of post and questions. Then I can say that I want to order by my publication date. I want in descending order, and I want to create a limit of 5. So this is the SQL statement, and we are writing the SQL statement in terms of Django API. And the next thing that we are doing is we are simply saving the output inside this variable called as latest question list. Now the type of this is a little bit interesting. So first let me import, then I can show you. Here I can say that from django.db.models I want to import my query set. Now the type of this is actually a query set, and this query set contains our model of question. So this query set is a list like kind of an object. We can iterate over the query sets, and that's what we are doing in our line number 12. So on the next line, that is on line number 12, they simply want to join all of the question text together. So in case if we have 5 questions, then we can have the 5 question text together, and all of the question text would be separated by a comma and a space. And finally, we simply have to return back the output. So let me save this file and let us go back, and let us go back to our application. So this, we simply have to go back to the route of /polls, and that's it. Right now we have just one question called as what's up. In case we have some more questions, they would be displayed right over here. So what we can do is we can go to the admin site and we can add a question really fast. So let us navigate right over here. So instead of polls, I want to go to my admin route. Let me slightly zoom out, and here from the questions I can simply click on add, and I can just say Python is easy to learn. I want my today's date, and the time has to be right now, and let me save the file, and let me go back to my site. The route has to be polls, and here we can see that we have the question text. Python is easy to learn, and the next is the question text that we had created a couple of lectures back. Now let us go back to the documentation and let us see what's happening. So we just did this one, and the next thing is they are talking about templates, and I think we will start with templates right in the next video.